Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. I'm Kenny McBride and joining me this evening once again is the wonderful Day Tucker. Hi Day, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm not bad. So we do have some pretty big news from this morning.
Yes.
The Inner House of the Court of Session this morning ruled that the Prime Minister's advice to Her Majesty the Queen that the United Kingdom Parliament should be prorogued was unlawful because it had the purpose of stymieing Parliament. This is a petition brought by 79 petitioners, 79 of whom are parliamentarians. Joanna Cherry was amongst the leaders of this, along with Julian Maugham of the Good Law Project.
Yes.
And this was actually the appeal hearing, the sort of second hearing of this case. Originally last week, as some of you will remember, there was a hearing by one lord who said that he couldn't judge it because as a political matter,
Yes.
it was not justiciable. But these lords have decided, the lords today decided that it would be unlawful because it, if I can just find the line, it would nevertheless be unlawful if its purpose was to stymie parliamentary scrutiny of the objective, which is a central pillar of the good governance principle enshrined in the Constitution. This followed from the principles of democracy and the rule of law. So quite a big decision day. What's your take on what's happened in the court this morning?
Huge relief, as I should think it is with a lot of people. And the fact that Boris Johnson isn't getting away with this kind of illegal action. And hopefully whoever is behind all this will be brought to book.
Well, we can... We'll have to wait and see what does happen. Certainly there's been quite strong reactions from across the political spectrum. The SNP, unsurprisingly, chief amongst them. Ian Blackford today wrote to the Prime Minister basically saying that since the prorogation of Parliament had been unlawful and that as the court said, the prorogation is thus null and of no effect, then effectively Parliament has not been prorogued,
Yes.
at least as far as Scots law is concerned. English law, oddly, views it differently. So we do have a bit of a tension there,
Yes.
which will be resolved when both cases are heard together, the English case and the Scottish case, and I believe the Northern Irish case as well, will all be heard in one hearing at the Supreme Court on Tuesday.
And the Welsh one?
I think English and Welsh are the same legal system for these purposes. So yeah, it's quite interesting because obviously if Parliament is not currently prorogued, then they should be sitting right now.
And did Ian Blackford not say that by not allowing Parliament to sit, Boris Johnson was acting illegally?
Yeah, there's been. He said, it's unlawful, and that the purpose was to stymie parliamentary scrutiny, and that the message from Downing Street to people across the UK, if Parliament continues to be frustrated, is that the government is above the law and that the Prime Minister can unilaterally decide our futures. This is an extremely dangerous situation, which of course it is. If the Prime Minister is able to do things that are unlawful without any sort of legal effect or any legal consequences for him, then we are effectively in a dictatorship.
Absolutely.
So this is a very good sign. Obviously, there's no guarantee that we're going to get good news from the Supreme Court because the English courts already have given it a different judgment and said that, again, because it is a political decision and not a matter of law, that it is ultimately the Prime Minister's prerogative to do this. So it is an interesting situation to be in. We've also heard from Joanna Cherry. As I said, she was one of the people who led the case. And again, saying very similar things. Today's ruling that Boris Johnson's plans to shut down the UK Parliament ahead of Brexit are unlawful and unconstitutional is a huge victory and a vindication of our case. We've uncovered more and more evidence that this was a plot by Boris Johnson and his cronies to prevent us from stopping them taking Scotland and the UK off a Brexit cliff. And I think that point about the evidence is particularly damning. They produced these memos that showed that prorogation was being considered as far back as August.
Yes.
Even though Johnson had specifically said that he had not made any plans in advance when he made the announcement that was what he was going to do. So what do you think this does for just the whole Brexit process? I mean, we've talked a lot about how much trust has been lost in our politicians.
Yes.
Do you think that there are people who are now thinking, oh, that Boris Johnson that I thought I could trust, now I don't? Or conversely, are there now people on the Brexit side of the argument saying, how can we ever trust the courts? This is twice they've tried to stop the will of the people.
I think that there are people who will trust Boris regardless. It doesn't matter how badly he behaves. They are determined that he is right, the Brexiteers are right, Nigel Farage is right, and they will get us out of the EU. So I don't think they're really interested in listening or making judgments or looking at a moral code or anything like that. And the other side, you'll get equally the opposite side, but the majority of people in the middle are the ones who will have the biggest influence in the long run. At the moment, it's all still noise.
Just one other reaction that came in from Patrick Harvey, the co-leader of the Greens. And he said, it's extraordinary that the UK government, even one which has descended ever further into minority status, should have the power to replace the Prime Minister, set the parliamentary agenda, and even force MPs to pack up and go home to avoid being held to account. No Scottish government would have the legal ability to act in this dictatorial manner. The present crisis has highlighted the urgent need for a modern democratic constitution which prevents the abuse of power by dangerous extremists like Boris Johnson.
Exactly.
And this was something that I either we discussed on the show previously or that I was talking to one of my friends about last night. I can't honestly recall which. But the issue of the Constitution itself, yes, that we you know the Inner House did refer to this breach of a basic constitutional principle that we have the rule of law and democracy in this country.
It kind of goes along with the arrogance of the Westminster Parliament and the politicians down there. They expect them all to behave like gentlemen, and you can see that running through the way they talk to each other, give themselves titles, and then don't behave like gentlemen. It's kind of been built along the lines of we must trust each other, we must behave well, etc., etc. But they've forgotten that human nature is changing. And society is changing, and we have had a lack of leadership, serious lack of leadership up at the top in Westminster, to try and keep people on the right track of a sort of moral boundary. And
I do sometimes wonder if that lack of a constitution, it's based on, I think, part of it is just historical accident, but I think there is something to that idea that Parliament is expected to be gentlemen who know how to behave.
Yes.
And it's not like it's letting in the working class that has dragged it down.
No.
I mean, that some of the worst offenders in there in terms of what might be called unparliamentary language or just acting acting unlawfully, showing contempt for Parliament, have been from the likes of Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg, who are, you know, fairly blue-blooded.
Yes. And even Nicholas Soames.
There's a whole host of them who are the people who you would think are supposed, or the people that, you know, the
should
the
set
British
an
system
example.
Expects to be in charge.
Yes.
You know, the all come from the playing fields of Eton.
Yes.
And yet they've got to Parliament and now have absolute contempt for democracy. I mean, the irony, obviously, is that the whole Brexit process was fought to return power to Westminster, and yet at every turn, the Tories have sought to take power away from Parliament over the actual Brexit process.
Yes.
Is there a way back at this stage, do you think, for the Tories, or do you think they've kind of crossed a Rubicon here?
No, I think there is a way back, and I think some of them are already on that route, because there's no doubt, I don't think any country, even though we've gone so close to the edge, I don't see the UK ever becoming a fascist country. Although I know we're pretty close to it, but I think that the silent majority will not allow it to happen. And we probably needed this split within the Tory party. It's been rumbling on for far too long, that, you know, the one side wanting one thing and the other side wanting, and they're fighting against each other. And it's like an ulcer that's needing lanced. And I think this has lanced it. And they, you know, it's a bit like Lord of the Flies, isn't it? Where you've got one group of schoolboys who are moral and caring, and being beaten down, and then you've got the other group, posh choir boys, who are really wicked and very like an awful lot of the ones in Parliament, and it goes right to the wire, and you think that the good guys are going to get flattened, and then suddenly authority comes in, a higher power who can see the difference between right and wrong. Dare I say it, that higher power at the moment is the EU.
Well, I mean, hopefully the courts are enough of a voice to get them back on track. But again, we will have to see. This Supreme Court case is very interesting. I think that'll be. I think we'll have a lot to talk about come Tuesday when that court case comes up. In the meantime, of course, we are still on track towards Brexit. Parliament has not been unprorogued today. There's no guarantee that it will at all now, because even if we get up to Tuesday, if the Supreme Court makes a decision not to uphold the Scottish decision, then we will just carry on as we are. So the SNP today spoke out about once again the threat to Scotland's economy. This is based on the Fraser of Allender Institute bringing out some figures saying that the hit to GDP of a no-deal Brexit would equate to GDP being £9 billion lower, and that job losses could rise by tens of thousands. This is Boris Johnson actually faces a deadline this evening to publish all of the Operation Yellowhammer documents. This is the preparation plan for No Deal that the cabinet has been looking at since July. There was a vote in Parliament just before they broke up, requiring him to do this, and certainly that's what several of the politicians outside the court today were saying was we want to get.
Do we really think though that those papers have not been shredded by now?
Well, again, that would be an interesting question to have answered, and certainly.
I mean, that's what happened with Cambridge Analytica, isn't it?
I mean, I don't know. We don't know what is there and what isn't. Certainly, if Johnson was not able to meet another specific demand of Parliament, it would be another really big strike against him, to be in contempt of Parliament, potentially, facing criminal action, given that he's said that he doesn't necessarily intend to even send this letter that he's been told he has to send
to the Queen,
to the EU.
Oh, to the EU, right?
To ask for a further delay.
Right.
It does seem very, very difficult to control him. He is something of a kind of out of control toddler who's just running around, demanding what he wants, smashing anything that gets in his way, and and crying when he doesn't get it.
Yes.
I struggle. We come on the show. We're on 4 nights a week, and then on Sundays as well. And every night, obviously, for the last however long, we've been talking about Brexit, and it just gets harder and harder to find ways to talk about just the absolute madness of all of it.
Absolutely, yes.
We're in a very strange kind of world, and again, Boris Johnson has spoken out, kind of implying that the judges were biased, and that this is why they heard it in Scotland, kind of thing. Which I believe it was the Attorney General came out and said, well, no, that's not really what we think.
Yes.
But this is the second time in the Brexit process that we've had direct attacks on judges,
yes,
on the impartiality of judges, for doing their job and upholding the law of the land, which for a campaign, the Brexit campaign, that fought so hard to say we must have control of our own laws. It must be British judges that rule on British laws.
Yes.
We can't have the EU interfering with parliamentary sovereignty, with our laws, with how our laws are administered.
Yeah.
And yet again, it's we can't trust the judges. We can't trust Parliament to make decisions. We have to circumvent all of this. It's such a dark place to be in, and I think it was another guest. I don't think it was you that said if this was some small African country,
yes,
that all this was happening in, we would look at it and we would think, should we be stepping in?
Yeah.
Should we be going and observing their elections and giving them some help and support to develop their democracy, because this is just such a mess.
Yes. The phrase "banana republic" comes to mind.
Yeah, we're not a republic, of course.
But I suspect the Brexiteers wish they were.
Well, yeah, it's just really an extraordinary set of circumstances. So we just have to keep an eye on it, I guess. And as I say, we will have definitely more to say on it on Tuesday after the Supreme Court sits.
Yes.
But in the meantime,
fingers crossed.
We have to move on and just take our wins where we get them at the moment, I think. And this is one that's at least putting some sort of brake on the whole process. In the meantime, the SNP has said that any election that may be coming up, it will be one of the most important in Scotland's history, and have urged Scots to register to vote now, so that they are ready for any snap election that might come. Ian Blackford said that after a decade of austerity cuts, Brexit and chaos coming out of Westminster, it shows that Britain really is broken and that the UK is not fit for purpose. Pretty much exactly what we've just been saying.
Yeah.
He said the UK Parliament had failed Scotland abysmally throughout Brexit, creating the worst crisis since the Second World War, and said that every vote will count in an election that will be fought on Scotland's right to choose our own future. I think that last line is one of the most interesting parts of this, that the SNP is saying that they will definitely be fighting the next election, whenever that might come, on a mandate to have
the right
another
to
vote
choose
on independence.
Yes.
Which is very encouraging for us. And to reiterate this, obviously everyone here at Broadcasting Scotland would urge everybody, double check that you are registered to vote. People fall off the electoral register for all sorts of reasons. It's not just because you've moved house or whatever. It's possible to fall off the register for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes, some people argue that some of those reasons are a little bit nefarious. But just do make sure that you are registered to vote. It's even if you choose not to vote for independence, it's still vitally important that you do vote. Your voice matters as much as anybody else's, and that's just a principle that we all have to live by.
Yeah.
You are registered to vote, I assume.
I am.
Excellent.
Yes.
One of the things I think that Scotland has done quite well at over the last few years is the electoral registration rate that we got for the independence referendum was extraordinary, and we've kept that up quite well.
Yes, I mean I've had I don't know how many reminders to and forms to fill in and send back, probably at least 2 a year. Mm-hmm. So they really are keeping up to date.
Yeah, it's strange. I mean, there was a period a few years ago when I heard a lot of people talking about how bad the electoral roll had got, and I think this was in England, how out of date it was, and how records weren't being kept well, and people were being not updated when they needed to keep themselves on it. Mm-hmm. So it is something that I think we can be quite proud of, the engagement with politics in Scotland.
Yes.
Comparative with the rest of the UK, generally speaking, I think is something we're doing very well. So again, just please do double check that you are registered to vote. It's there is if Boris Johnson has his way, there will be an election very soon. If everyone else in Westminster has their way, there will be one quite soon. So we do want to make sure that everybody is able to participate in that.
Yes.
So today in the Scottish Parliament, speaking of doing democracy in better ways, there was a debate on the citizens' assemblies, which they've been announced a few weeks ago. They're due to start meeting just a few weeks from now, but this debate just endorsed the concept and authorised them to carry on. MSPs voted in favour of the Assembly, its independent conveners, its remit and its terms of reference. We reported on all of this, I think, last week on the show. They also committed to holding a debate on the Assembly's recommendations, which was part of the remit that was set up the other week. Then this would be followed within 3 months by a response from the Scottish Government setting out how each recommendation would be taken forward. So Mike Russell opened the debate. He made it clear that it was independent, free to decide how to follow its remit, and it did not replace the role of Parliament. He said, if we are to row back from the Brexit impasse, we must listen to new voices in new ways. We must pay attention, focus and understand, and then we must act. He said, I want to be challenged by the Citizens' Assembly. I want it to say things that make each one of us think anew and reflect anew on where we stand. It is a radical act of listening. This will be Scotland's first National Citizens' Assembly, but not its last. I believe that adding Citizens' Assemblies to our civic and democratic structures is a natural step for this open and more inclusive Parliament. So, what do you think about these Citizens' Assemblies? Is this something you know very much about, or...?
Well, not a huge amount. It's a kind of a more formal way of having the national conversations that we had during the referendum, when we would gather in the village hall or wherever, or quite often the other groups would put on debates and discussions with panels. I sat on several different panels. I can remember sitting on one way up in Dunkeld somewhere, and John Swinney was on the panel, and I thought, wow, little me and John Swinney, and Ben Ray, who was just up and coming at that time, from Commonweal, very able young man, and who else was there? There must have been somebody else, but anyway, I really enjoyed these discussions that we had. There weren't that many people questioning what we were doing. The no people just didn't want to know. It was like they said, we don't want it, and we don't want anything to do with it. And it was very difficult for them for people who were organising these panels to get anybody from the no side to come onto a panel in the first place. We did manage one in Stirling, and Adam Tompkins was there, and Anne Maguire, who had been our MP for a long, long time. She was obviously one of the no's, but she's a lovely woman, Anne, and she was engaging with us and
First
so
time I ever voted was for Anne Maguire.
for
in
Anne,
87.
yeah. But Adam Tompkins, oh my goodness, he set off to diss Scotland. That was his opening statements. It was all about how we couldn't do this and we couldn't do that, and it was the way he kind of sneered at it. Well, did he get his head in his hands? The audience did not like that at all, and he had to pull himself together, and his attitude changed after that, and he became more reasoned in his discussions.
Yeah, I think it's true. I think one of the really fun parts of the 2014 campaign was just how much people were talking about what Scotland might look like in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. And that, I think, was very uncomfortable ground for unionists.
Yes.
Because they didn't have any
vision.
They didn't have any vision for the future. Everything was, well, everything will stay pretty much the same. And until it got to, the last minute when Gordon Brown suddenly started promising federalism and all that.
Yes.
But one of the exciting things was this, you had the Greens putting out this really, big vision of a completely environmentally sustainable, socially just Scotland. You had the SNP putting out this vision of a really vibrant economy, really kind of driving out and building the Scottish brand around the world. Yeah. You had Commonweal,
which they have achieved.
You had Commonweal coming out with some quite wonky proposals, but some really really interesting ideas.
Absolutely.
And it was just this big explosion of thinking about what Scotland could be, and I think if the citizens' assemblies can be anything like that, then it can only be a positive. Yeah. One thing you mentioned about the Tory, or rather the Unionists, not wanting to get involved in 2014. The Tories today in the debate were saying what a terrible thing this was, that the SNP had just wanted to talk about independence, and they'd kind of framed the whole thing to just be a backdoor to independence. And I find that hard to believe. I mean, obviously they're hoping that that's what will come out of it. But from the terms of reference, from the people that they've chosen to be the conveners, I mean, one of them is a former Labour MEP. Right. He's hardly a diehard nationalist, David Martin.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, he's wonderful. Oh, good. He's really good, David.
I don't know him.
Hard-working MEP he was. Was he not one of the longest-serving MEPs?
I think he was, yeah. I think he's been there
and
quite
a very
long time.
Balanced individual. No, I've got huge admiration for him.
Oh, well, that's a good sign.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Tories and to a certain extent the Lib Dems were quite unhappy about the whole idea, which to me it just reflects conservative in the worst sense. This feeling that nothing can change, nothing should change. That nothing can ever get any better.
And you'd think, I mean, there they are, sitting on a little broken raft, heading towards the Gulf and the Rapids, and all these ideas coming in and when talking in Parliament. Is there not a flicker of light in any one of them that says, "Oh, I wish I wasn't on"? And Boris is so embarrassing, but no, they're still out there defending him.
Well, I mean, Ruth Davidson finally.
Well, she finally snapped.
Finally snapped and has given it up. But yeah, I think I do wonder about the mentality of people like Adam Tompkins or Willie Rennie.
Ross Thompson. Yes, it was. Was he not on with Joe Coburn today, even or yesterday?
I didn't see it. No.
And he's giving it laldy, and you're thinking, what world, what planet are you living on?
Yeah. What must it be like to spend that time thinking that your country just isn't good enough to do anything? To defend
a man who is an inveterate liar.
Yeah, I mean, I think being a Tory right now must be
hard.
Must be fairly difficult. As you said, though, there are a number who have left the party.
Yeah.
One or two already have said they're going to join the Lib Dems, which
yes.
I think won't actually do the Lib Dems any favours.
No.
Although certainly under
they're not
Joe
much
Swinson,
the same.
Under Joe Swinson, it does seem that they're leaning more towards the right than towards the left, as they were under certain previous leaders.
Yes, yes.
And that both parties, certainly the Tories and the Lib Dems, are now the two that are, I think, fighting to be the most unionist in Scotland. The Lib Dems are just, especially with Swinson, just furiously anti-independence. Which again, this is where we get to this situation where they're not even wanting to hear what the people of Scotland have to say about the future.
Yeah.
Which I think, from the Lib Dems especially, is just tragic. To be so firmly anti-Brexit,
yes,
and yet to not even want to consider the possibility that maybe England should get what it voted for and Scotland should get what it voted for.
Yeah, yeah.
Wouldn't that be both liberal and democratic?
Yes, one would have thought.
But anyway, we do have some good news today, some very good news in fact. The SNP have hailed a really big victory for them, which the Tories are claiming as a masterful stroke of genius on their own part. This is the scrapping of a U-turn on the scrapping of the post-study work visa.
Yes.
You'll no doubt remember, going back, I think, as far as 2012, the SNP has been saying how bad this was for Scotland, that we were having people flood into the country to go to our universities, and then we were making them leave as soon as they'd finished and not giving them a chance to spend some time.
And they were only making it for 3 years or something, whereas our courses are 4 years, aren't they?
There was also a problem. It's a slightly different issue, but it was all part of the same story. But this is for people who were previously allowed to stay in the country and work for a period of time after studying. But then this was cut so that people who were in the middle of that period were getting sent home because their visa was just cancelled. So this has been, as I say, something that the SNP have been fighting for 7 years now, and it's finally been turned around. So Stuart MacDonald, who's spokesman for the SNP on one of these issues, says this screeching Tory U-turn is a huge victory for the SNP, the Scottish Government, and for Scotland's education sector. We have been campaigning hard for the reintroduction of the post-study work visa ever since the Tory Lib Dem coalition government's damaging decision to scrap it in 2012. This long overdue move underlines the absurdity of this shambolic Tory government and their harmful and erratic hostile environment policies. The devil will be in the detail as to whether this proposal is a full replacement and meets Scotland's specific needs. Having now accepted the decision to scrap the post-study visa was wrong, the Tories and Lib Dems should apologise for the damage they have caused by deterring international students from coming to live, work and contribute to Scotland. Westminster has consistently failed Scotland when it comes to immigration policy. It is clearer than ever that the only way to properly protect Scotland's interests and build an immigration system that truly meets Scotland's needs is to become an independent country. I mean, it's not surprising that the SNP would take that attitude, but it does, I think, again highlight that Scotland has a much less population pressure even than England. Now, I'm not in any sense arguing that England's full up and can't handle any more immigration, but there are significant parts of Scotland where we've had significant depopulation. and we really do need a different kind of immigration system.
Yeah.
I've often thought that it would be relatively easy to give people a card that just said eligible to work in Scotland.
Yes.
And then you wouldn't, even if we were to end freedom of movement from Europe, you know, people could have a card that said eligible to work in Scotland, controlled by the Scottish government, and people could then work in Scotland.
Yes.
You would just have to, when you went to apply for a job, you would either show them your passport, show that you were British, or show them this card to say, you know, I'm allowed to work here.
Yes.
If you went to England, you didn't have the British passport to show, you just wouldn't get the job. It does seem to me that, again, after cases like the Brains or like Lizanne Zietsman that we spoke with a few weeks ago, there are so many people come to this country from elsewhere in the world, and they don't necessarily want to be in Glasgow or Edinburgh. They want to be out in the country. That's what they've come to Scotland for, is for that kind of life.
Yes.
And to deny rural communities that influx of talent and life, and often young people, you know, young couples with young kids, going into kind of much quieter areas and setting up businesses, getting involved in the community. You know, you often find that it's the immigrants that come into an area that get really involved in everything. You know, they're involved in the village theatre, and they run a business, and they're, you know, getting involved in running a gala day and all these kind of things. You know, these are the things that immigrants often bring to small communities where. That's
right. Yeah.
I mean, you and I both
different
know
dimensions.
Spending time in villages.
Yes.
You know, things do sometimes get a wee bit slow and dry, and not very much happens.
Yes.
And very often it is when some new family comes in and says, "Why don't we do this here?"
Yes.
That things start to happen.
Yes.
So yeah, I know I'm just kind of talking a lot. I'm not giving you very much to say.
No, that's okay. No, you're talking about that sort of thing. And in my village, one of the areas in Stirling, there's 12 different communities in our rural southwest area of Stirling, and it's very vibrant. And each community has its own, well, obviously it's community council, but it also has what we call community futures companies. Okay. And they're able to apply for funding and grants for various things. And I know that in my village, we had at one time 40 different user groups using the village hall. And we applied for funding from the Scottish Rural Development Fund, the EU one, which is a farming one. And we got £1.4 million to develop and extend the village hall. And we've got a business in it now running a really good sort of restaurant cum cafe place. So you've linked up a bit of commercial with an amenity for the village to go to and visitors to visit. And it's just so vibrant. And then underneath that, under Community Futures, there's at least, or there was in my day, about 12 different groups. And we've still got, for instance, the floral display group, and the nice barrels with flowers throughout the village. It's about 6 or 7 people who do that and maintain the flowers, and they look absolutely beautiful. That's just one thing. We've got an archive group who have, collated all the information that they can find. They've taken sound recordings of old people and what they did when they were children and parts of the village they went to. And we get people from abroad contacting them to say, I had relatives, and can you tell me where they lived? And particularly people from America and Canada. What other groups? We've got all sorts of groups. There's a village sale once a month for food and crafts and that sort of thing. That's hard work, but it's really good. But just amazing. And it comes from individuals in the community, new, old, whatever. They come to us and they'll say, well, we would like to do such and such. What do you think? and we'll look at it and give them encouragement, ask them to take it to the community council, see what the community council thinks. As long as they're happy with it, then we'll help them get funding for it, and off they go.
Yeah, that's fabulous, and that's exactly how rural communities stay
how
vibrant.
they function.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear.
Paths Group, that's the other one. Now the Greens like that because we've been working for years on a path school routes between our village and the next door village, and ideally beyond to the other villages in our area. And I know that, well, I've already got 1, 2, 3, I think we've got 4 core paths existing on the farm. And they're going to make this other one. And at long last, my other neighbouring farmers have been persuaded to give a wee bit of ground for a path. So it's not just me that's carrying the load, because I feel as though I have been, but they're contributing a bit of ground for a path. So we will have an all-user path in time going from Killearn to Balfron. So potentially the children can cycle to school.
Wow.
Off the main road.
Off the main roads, yeah, that sounds excellent. You'll have to keep
and they'll get healthy as well.
You'll have to keep us updated on that one.
Yeah.
Moving on now, this is a really interesting story. MEPs have had some criticisms to make of new job titles in the European Commission. The incoming president, Ursula von der Leyen, has been pilloried for giving the EU's most senior official on migration the job title Protecting Our European Way of Life. She's given the title to the European Commission Vice President in charge of migration and skilled labour. However, the MEPs who have to approve the team before they can actually take office were deeply critical. Claude Moraes, the senior Labour MEP, said calling the European Commission migration portfolio Protecting Our Way of Life is deeply insulting. Sophie in 't Veld, a Liberal MEP, said the very point about the European way of life is the freedom for individuals to choose their own way of life. She said, "We do not need a commissioner for that, thank you very much." The implication that Europeans need to be protected from external cultures is grotesque, and this narrative should be rejected. So Margaritis Chinas, who's the vice president who's been given that role, he said he's not using the title in his Twitter biography. He instead describes himself as Commissioner Designate for Migration, Security, Social Rights, Education, Youth and Culture. So that title wasn't the only one that got some attention. Valdis Dombrovskis, who's coming back for a second term as the leading on the EU policy on financial stability, has the job title An Economy That Works for People. The Commission will also have vice presidents in charge of, and I quote, a stronger Europe in the world, Europe fit for a digital age, and democracy and demography. So these replace the old-fashioned terms, which were things like foreign policy and security, or the digital single market. And there's a comment here from Alberto Alemano, who's a professor of EU law. He said he was deeply troubled by the infelicitous semantic choices of job titles as they reflect a sense of detachment from European realities. I thought, I mean...
And from what... It doesn't describe what the job title is at all.
Well, yes. I mean, protecting the European way of life could quite easily have been about defence. In actual fact, it's about migration. And that's... I mean, that's quite an offensive phrasing. I mean... Maybe there's something that we're missing in translation, but it does seem like a very right-wing framing of the idea of managing migration is about protecting the European way of life.
Is Ursula von Leyen not from quite a right-wing party?
I don't believe so.
Is she not the same one as...
She's a CDU member from Germany. I'm pretty sure she's from the CDU, which is rightish.
Rightish.
I mean,
more
probably
right
the equivalent
than
of the Tories.
Angela Merkel.
Oh, that is Angela Merkel's party.
Oh, it is her party, right. I seem to remember something floating in the background about a tension between the two of them.
Yeah, I believe there is, but I think that's personal rather than political.
But I thought it was to do with migration, this tension.
It might be. I'm honestly not enough of an expert on von der Leyen to say so.
Because it kind of follows on, if that's her way of thinking, then that's why she's doing this.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think about these kind of titles? I mean, we've all seen jobs across all kinds of sectors that have some quite odd titles. It seems to be a modern affliction of certain corporate cultures.
Possibly.
What do you make of that kind of thing?
Oh, it just makes it just turned me off immediately when I saw it. I found it offensive.
Yeah.
Particularly the migration one. The others not quite so much, but the migration one was no. I thought that is not on.
Yeah. I mean, it's very.
I don't see it getting through the Parliament.
It's quite odd. I don't know if they actually need the parliamentary approval to change the job titles. But one of the things that I always found about the EU is that everything is very prosaic. Everything is the names of everything, and I guess that's because they all have to work in multiple languages.
Right.
So you don't necessarily want something that only really sounds right in English or French or German. But yeah, I just thought this was a really interesting wee story that this is how the EU, which in fairness is trying to steer itself away as an organisation, is trying to steer away from that hard right movement that's touching a lot of parts of the EU just now.
Or maybe they're trying to ameliorate a little bit, and
possibly. I mean, that may be what it is, that they're getting some influence from the further right, and they're trying
saying, look, we're going to give you
mollify
this.
them a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
Although I have to say, I'm not sure that that's a particularly good strategy.
No.
It's very difficult to once you start giving ground to far right ideas. You know, it's British jobs for British workers and controls on immigration mugs. Just normalises the idea that there is a European way of life that has to be protected from the outside.
Remind me what Phil Hogan's title is supposed to be, the agriculture
Phil Hogan,
one.
now he's trade, isn't he?
Trade, that's right.
I'm not sure.
I think he was at the bottom.
I don't have it listed
have it.
here. No, sorry. Well, yeah, well.
Because that would be interesting to see.
Yeah, we will look into that, but I just thought that was quite an interesting little story. Back in Scotland, though, there has been an update on the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People in Edinburgh. As most of you will probably know, this was meant to open recently and has been delayed now until spring of 2020. This was Jean Freeman announced this in Parliament today. She said, "I would like to acknowledge the contribution of staff who have continued to provide high quality clinical services. We are all very grateful for their dedication and professionalism in what have been very difficult and disappointing circumstances. I am of course bitterly disappointed that a mistake made in 2012 was not picked up earlier. This is a publicly funded project of strategic importance which has not been delivered in compliance with the standards and guidance. The delay we will now face will be borne by NHS Lothian staff, by patients and their families, and the additional cost will be to the public purse." So there's a number of issues that have to be resolved, including the ventilation and water systems. Those modifications are ongoing, but it does now seem that the target is to get the place open for spring next year. So disappointing, I think we would all agree. Do you have any connections in Edinburgh to people who might be using that hospital?
No, I know my daughter worked there for a short while, but that was before the improvements.
Yeah. I was talking to my sister. She lives out in East Lothian, and it's frustrating for her because she's had to go to the children's hospital a couple of times. Nothing serious, but the current one is on the other side of the city, so she's desperate for this one to open. Yes. Because it'll be so much closer to them, so much easier to get to.
Yes.
So yeah, the other one is right in the city centre, and it's just a bit more hassle to get to. But good news, I suppose, that things are moving forward, and just very, very disappointing that it's taken so long to get up to speed.
But wouldn't it be wonderful if there was some way that building companies could just pull their socks up? I mean, look what we've suffered with the PFI schools falling apart. And there's another example of that hospital. And the Queen Elizabeth hasn't got its troubles to seek as well. The materials that they've used for it are not lasting very long. And some of the design faults are becoming quite clear. Where does the buck stop?
That's a good question. With this particular case, as far as I understand it, there was an error in the design.
It usually is with the design.
And the construction was complete before anybody realised that this issue with the drainage and the ventilation was going to be a problem. So it is very frustrating. The Greens have commented, saying there's a huge delay, and the people who will be most disappointed will be the staff and patients who are currently crammed into the old site. Obviously, they're supporting that patient safety should come first, but what they've said, those who have supported private finance used to argue that the risk would be transferred to the private sector. And this case reveals that the argument to be totally bogus, just as the Greens have maintained for 20 years.
Yes.
With the SNP's NPD model, just like PFI before it, it's the public that picks up the cost when
just
things
like
go
the
wrong.
banks.
And this time at £1.35 million per month. I mean, obviously the Scottish Government is in a bit of a bind because it only has fairly limited borrowing powers, even for major capital projects. So there is a difficulty with that, but certainly I think we would all agree that traditional investment by governments is probably a safer way to go, and perhaps with that we could look to have some expertise in place in government or in the civil service to make sure that these kind of things don't happen, because it's not like there are building houses is one thing, building hospitals is a very, very specialised business, and it does seem that having 2 hospitals recently in Scotland that have had similar problems emerge does suggest that maybe there's a systemic problem with getting these things designed properly.
Yes.
So we will keep an eye on that, obviously. Good news, I suppose, that we do now have a date when we can expect the hospital to be open, but as we say, very frustrating for our friends in Edinburgh, especially those with sick children.
Yes.
It's not a nice experience to be going into an old hospital that's clearly at the end of its life when you're sick. So in some news that's I don't know if this is good news or bad news. This is police investigating the disappearance of Renee McRae and her son Andrew back in 1976. Have today arrested and charged a 77-year-old man in connection with their deaths. So this man was arrested in the north of England this morning by police, Scotland's major investigation team, and he appeared at Inverness Sheriff Court later this afternoon. So there's a forensic search ongoing. The bodies have not actually been recovered, but Detective Inspector Brian Geddes said, "This is a significant development in an investigation which started when Renee and Andrew disappeared in November 1976. Their disappearance has had an unimaginable impact on the lives of Renee and Andrew's family and friends for several decades. This has also been keenly felt in Inverness, but also across Scotland and beyond. Police officers and staff from across the country, as well as a number of partner agencies and contractors, have put an enormous amount of work into this investigation from 1976 to the present day, allowing us to reach this point. The remains of Renee and Andrew have not been recovered. However, the search of large quantities of material removed from Leanach Quarry continues. I would like to thank everyone who has assisted the investigation, whether during our recent inquiries or at any time since 1976. They've also given an email address to contact if you happen to have any information. I don't know if anybody watching this will have, but if you do know anything, if you've got anything to contribute to this investigation, you can reach them at SCD Homes, that's HOLMES, Inverness, at scotland.pnn.police.uk. That's SCD HOLMES, Inverness, at scotland.pnn.police.uk. And you can also just contact Crime Stoppers on 0800 555 111 or call the police directly on 101. This is, I mean, obviously a very old case, 43 years ago. Almost exactly. It was the beginning of November that this happened in 1976. I don't know. Is this a case that you remember? It's
yes.
Just very slightly before my time. But
no, I do remember it. Yes, and I think did they say that they, after draining that loch, they uncovered a pushchair? So I'm wondering if that's what has given this serious link. Maybe they can identify the pushchair.
I don't have details on that. We don't want to speculate too much. Obviously, the police are not saying a huge amount, given that the bodies haven't been recovered.
Yes.
Often that's something where they want to be very careful about what they say. Yeah, there's also a live case, so we have to be very careful about what we can say to avoid being held in contempt. But yeah, I mean, it's I suppose a good thing that even after 40 years, the police are still looking at cases like this. For a family to lose, Ms. McRae was only 36 years old,
yes.
And her son was very young, just 3 years old. So, it must have been devastating for the family and for other people who knew that. And now, 40 years later, people who are in their 70s,
yes,
who were friends, ages with Rennie McRae at the time, to have lived all of that part of their lives, wondering what happened. We hope that this can bring some closure. We obviously congratulate the police for finding this person. If it turns out that this man is guilty, then we obviously congratulate the police, and we do send out our best wishes to the family and friends of the McRaes. Just a horrible story to read about, but with a wee bit of luck, hopefully now some solace and some peace coming to the family and friends. And just finally, some more good news for Scotland. Low-income Scottish families will benefit from improved access to learning, advice and employment support with a multi-million-pound package of measures. Community Secretary Aileen Campbell has set out the next steps of an ambitious plan to help lift parents and families out of poverty, backed by the £50 million Tackling Child Poverty Fund. So this is just a series of projects. £4 million for initiatives to enhance family incomes by improving access to work. £500,000 for a new Family Learning Scotland programme to help parents gain new skills. £1 million to build on good practice and help improve the life chances of young children and their young parents and their children. An additional £1.5 million to help social landlords prevent homelessness for low-income families. So these are some quite interesting proposals. What do you make of this news from the Scottish Government?
Yes, well, what's not to like? Let's hope it gets spent wisely. I'm sure with Aileen in charge of it, she'll make sure it is spent wisely.
Well, yeah, and coming just on top of the announcement that the new child payment will be launched by the end of this year, it's really cast iron proof, I think, that the Scottish Government is doing everything in its power to help reduce poverty, especially child poverty in Scotland, and make Scotland one of the best places, certainly the best place in Britain to raise a child.
Yes.
Just as long as they don't happen to get sick in Edinburgh right now.
Yeah. Yes.
Anyway, we are...
It's only the building that's a bit dodgy, though, isn't it? I always remember when our school, we got a new school, and it was the only PFI in Stirling, and it looked very posh. But prior to it going up, I can remember our deputy rector showing parents around, and he was always heard to say, "Now, you don't need to judge us by our surroundings," he said. "It's the quality of the staff and the atmosphere in our school that is the important thing."
And I can say with some certainty, because they've treated both my niece and my nephew, that the staff at the Sick Kids in Edinburgh are fabulous. It's just the new building that we have some issues with.
Yes.
So that is all we've got time for tonight. Thank you so much today for coming in. It's always a pleasure to have you. And to you at home, we would just remind you, as we always do, producing TV programmes is really expensive, and we are running everything here at Broadcasting Scotland on a shoestring budget. We would love to make more programmes, get out of the studio more, go and do our Scottish Question Time programme on the road. But in order to do that, we need your money. It's that simple. It costs money to do these things, and we can't afford to do it without you. So do please, if you can afford it, go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register, sign up as a supporter. Your £5 a month makes a huge difference. And as I say, I've said every night I've been on recently, 300 more subscribers would get us to the point where we can afford to take that Scottish Question Time show on the road. And that's something we absolutely want to do, especially if there is an election, a referendum on Europe, or even a referendum on Scotland coming up anytime in the near future. So do please, if you can, support us as much as you can. We will always be free to view though, so do join us again tomorrow night. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name's been Kenny McBride, and this is Scotland at 7 on Broadcasting Scotland.